Hello, I'm going to be talking a little bit about APIs and services and the difference between the two of them and whether or not you need one platform to manage APIs and services or whether you need two. I'm going to start today by talking a little bit about the common misconceptions. The first one is that APIs and web services are distinguished by the technology that they use, JSON versus SOAP. I think that this is a very common misconception because the newer technologies, the web technologies and mobile technologies, web and mobile clients, tend to use JSON and tend to use JSON over REST. Whereas older, potentially technologies such as web services have used SOAP in the past. So what's happened is web services has been very tightly coupled to SOAP and WS star, of course, and APIs are considered to be JSON and REST. This is not necessarily true if you think about it. The one thing that really clarifies this to me is if I think about the emergence of newer protocols with HTML5 and new client types bringing about or promoting the use of WebSockets in many cases. This is neither REST nor necessarily JSON, and it's definitely not WS star, but people start to look at WebSockets and they start bundling that into the concept of an API. So when I look at APIs, I try not to think about necessarily the technology that they couple to. I try to think of what an API is at large in terms of what it means to the business and what it means from an integration perspective. I don't believe that APIs are tied to a particular kind of technology. I think it's just a different way of looking at the problem of integration. So I definitely feel that there's a misconception that JSON REST is tightly aligned with APIs. I think as technologies progress and as we move to adopt new protocols and new message types, the concept of an API is going to evolve as well and is going to encapsulate that. A lot of people still believe that an API is a web service. Is a web service really coupled to SOAP and WS star? Perhaps not. The initial days of thinking about web services was all about how do I connect systems together? How do I connect the Internet of Things to a back-end system? And that still fundamentally hasn't changed. So I don't like to couple these concepts very tightly with the technology, the underlying technology, because that really dates it and it locks us into a certain technology set and it doesn't allow us to move past that. The second misconception is that APIs have become an external interface to the organization, while web services have become the componentry for internal collaborations and integration. This is analogous or similar when you think about SOA. People have looked at a service-oriented architecture as a way of saving money internally, and they've started to look at APIs as a way of making money between themselves and partners or between themselves and the general public. I think that this is a dangerous misconception because if you start looking at APIs in general and technology sets that are associated with APIs, per my first point, you start running into problems where you start using these technologies and protocols and platforms and the concept of an API internally as well. And that goes against the second misconception, or it forms the basis of the second misconception, that an API is really just the external interface of an organization. A lot of companies, a lot of our customers are using APIs internally, both between applications and between themselves and BYOD applications, or between themselves and partners. It's not the whole concept of an open API and the public API face is not necessarily that cut and dried. So let's look a little bit at what an API is. So an API to me has become a broader term than a web service. It is not exclusive to JSON over HTTP as some may lead us to believe. So when I look at an API, I don't necessarily tie it to a specific protocol or message type. I believe that an API can utilize different data formats and different protocols, whether it be XML, SOAP, JSON, plain text, WebSockets over HTTP with TCP, MLLP, JMS, or MQ. It does not matter. We should not be constraining our definition of an API to any particular kind of protocol or message type. And I also don't believe that APIs excludes web services, SOAP, XML, or JMS. We cannot take a very constrained view of an API, because what that's going to do is it's going to box us in. And if you're putting together a platform that manages and exposes and leverages APIs, in 2 years or 5 years' time, that is going to be obsolete because of just people's preconceptions of what an API is to them. So what is fundamentally the difference then? What do we need to look at? And I think that the important thing here is how things differentiate through exposure. So when should I use XML SOAP? When should I use JSON over HTTP? When should I use WebSockets? This is not a question about when should I use an API and when should I use a web service. It's more of a choice of technology that is dictated by the client. So if you're exposing an API, you need to look at who is going to be using that API. So if it's a web-based client or a JavaScript-based client, then you need to start looking at JSON over HTTP, because that is native to JavaScript. You need to look at WebSockets because of its support for HTML5 and its event-based push model. If you're looking at creating APIs for mobile clients, perhaps you're going to stick with something that is like JSON over HTTP. If you're looking for application to application integration, or perhaps B2B integration, then XML may be the most relevant message type over a protocol such as HTTP, for instance. Or if you need reliability, then for heaven's sake, use a reliable protocol like JMS or MQ. Don't get bogged down and don't get locked into other people's preconceived notions as to what an API is. Look at who is going to be using those APIs and what technology sets are the best choices. And you may very well need to expose multiple API types, for want of a better term, depending on the channel that you're trying to create. So you might need to expose both a JSON over HTTP as well as an XML over HTTP style API, because you're going to be catering to different consuming clients. So if I take a step back and I think about how can I simplify this mismatch of protocols and terminology, I like to think of APIs as simply a superset of web services. And I also like to think of it as a business differentiation, not a technical one at all. When I talk about APIs, I don't talk about protocols, because protocols come and go. It's more of a business product focus. And what I mean by that is that it is a business-driven initiative. It's got nothing to do with the technology on the wire. It's got more to do with the focus from a business perspective. And the business is now building an API because it is trying to release a new product to meet the demands of a new channel. And we have other presentations in our YouTube channel that actually talk about business partnerships with APIs, and I encourage you to take a look at those. The other thing I think that APIs have done that web services have not done is shifted the center of gravity. And what I mean by this is, in the past, organizations have built B2B integration. And for every new business partner that comes along, they have tried to be flexible. They've tried to accommodate. They've changed their interface. They've changed their method of communication. And what ends up happening is an organization that is trying to build a B2B a channel has exposed many different types of services with many different message types, many different versions of the interface, and have basically tried to cater to their different business partners. And the reason for this, I believe, is primarily because the business has not been focused on building the API. And I don't necessarily mean that the nitty-gritty around the technology, but I believe that the business has asked IT to come along and support their channel. And the business has not focused or had a priority in consolidating that API and building that API as a product. They've only been interested in creating the partnerships, and IT, because they're trying to respond to business, has tried to be flexible and therefore build a large number of interfaces, a large number of APIs, so to speak, to foster and to support that business channel. If we turn it around and change the center of gravity and we ask the business to focus on building the API and bringing the API to market as if it was a product, then you end up with far fewer APIs to support your business community. You release the API, you document it, you support it, and it becomes a product. In the same way as a business does not go out and create 10,000 slight variations on a single product to meet a particular market, they're also not going to want to create 1,000 different versions of the same API to meet that same channel. So I think that APIs has brought about a sort of a shifted center of gravity when it comes to the actual API definition, and that lowers the overall cost of maintaining that API. You also need a single platform, of course, that's flexible enough to handle multiple transports and protocols, message types, descriptors, and documentation standards. It's very, very easy to get locked down into a particular platform, and then as technology evolves, you buy another platform. And as technology evolves a little further, you buy a third platform. And that is that is something that has sort of persisted through IT and business over the past, I don't know, few decades. And I think that there's a danger in that. People need to buy a platform that is flexible enough to adopt new and emerging API protocols and standards as they come about. And this is very, very important. You need to look at the platform and determine, is this platform locked into XML? Does it rely on XML? Is it XML only? Is it XML native? And if it is, then as that technology evolves, or as new things come along, like WebSockets with perhaps JSON message types, it's not going to perform very well. It's not going to be a good fit. It's going to be a square peg in a round hole. So when you pick up, say, an XML gateway, for example, you need to be able to look at the architecture and determine for yourself whether or not it will be able to support, say, JSON RESTful services going forwards. And many of them don't today. Many of them are legacy technology sets with legacy concepts that don't embrace new and emerging protocols and technologies very well. So you will end up with new API platforms going forwards because your XML gateways simply can't cope with them, or at least cope with them very well. So if I look at a sort of a sample topology going back to, going back a couple of steps, I might have a set of internal services on the right, web services on the right, or APIs on the right, that are SOAP over HTTP or MQ, and that's for my application to application integration tasks. And then on the left-hand side, I might have a number of different channels with different clients. I might have a mobile app using JSON over HTTP. I might have a web app with HTML5 consuming services with of WebSockets. I might have a partner reward system using SOAP, perhaps, over HTTP. And these different APIs are consuming different back-end APIs. And this is a classic sort of topology that we find within our partners and customers. The challenges, however, are fairly common across all these different protocol and standards types. You need to be able to publish your API. You need to be able to mediate and integrate. You need to be able to perform monitoring and remediation, and you need to be able to do lifecycle management. So irrespective of whether it's a web service using SOAP over HTTP or MQ, or whether it's WebSockets, these are common challenges that occur independent of the technology type. Let's look first at publication. So the publication of different types of APIs requires a central location for all the interface information. You need to be able to describe the protocol, the parameters, how the API behaves, its location, and how it is secured. And this is a pretty broad set of things. Your protocol is going to be different depending on what that channel is or what is supported. You need to be able to describe a WebSockets kind of interaction. You need to be able to describe MQ or JMS or SOAP. You need to be able to describe the parameters. Maybe they're RESTful parameters. Maybe it's a JSON object. Maybe it's an XML schema. You need to be able to describe these parameters in some way within the platform that is not only consistent, but flexible enough to cover all these different kinds of mechanisms. Behavior, you might have different kinds of policies or different kinds of reliability. All of these describe different kinds of behaviors associated with the API. If you think about WebSockets, it's event-based. But if you think about SOAP, well, that's post XML with SOAP, and it behaves in a particular way. REST behaves in a particular way. So these behaviors need to be described. The location, the endpoint is going to be different for different protocol sets. Security is going to be radically different depending on whether it's JSON REST with OAuth potentially, or whether it's WS security, perhaps using SAML for SOAP over HTTP. So there's a lot of variability potentially in these different kinds of interfaces or APIs that you're going to be exposing. So a single platform needs to be able to, or should be able to, present different descriptor and documentation models. It also needs to be able to mediate between them. For example, you might have Swagger, WSDL, schema, JSON schema, different kinds of ways to describe model objects, different ways of describing the endpoints, different ways of doing documentation that's either interactive or not, different descriptor models that might be consumed by different clients. And all of these things need to be able to, you need to be able to mediate between them to make it easier to manage these things. So for example, if you have a single API and you want to expose this API using JSON over REST, and you also want to be able to expose the same API using SOAP over HTTP, then it's far, far easier if you have a single common description of that particular API and ways of generating these different documentation or descriptor models from that. So you should be able to take an API and very, very easily manifest it in more than one way for each individual channel. And that'll help you with change control, and it'll help you with version management going forwards. So a single platform should be able to also support this cohesive or a cohesive developer community. Irrespective of the technology that your APIs are being exposed or how they're being exposed, your developers need to be a consistent and cohesive community. So developers need to be able to pick and choose whichever API type that they want, or from a catalog of different types of APIs, but they need to be able to interact with each other to be able to question and ask questions and get support, etc., etc. So you need a single cohesive developer community independent of the underlying technology set behind the API. So this really bolsters my opinion that you need a single platform that is technology or agnostic to all of these different technologies, or at least extensible and customizable to support these different technology sets. The other thing that you see a lot of independent of the type of API is mediation and integration. So publishing an API often requires mediation. Your API, your backend API is currently XML, but clients also need JSON. The API is SOAP, but client applications need WebSockets. You have different trust domains or identities or security systems between the front-end API that you're exposing outside of your organization and your back-end application systems. Your API might use OAuth, but your back-end systems or services or APIs might be using WS security. So mediation is an integral part of the API platform that you're going to be putting together. How do you actually support and how do you easily mediate between these different types of APIs within your environment? You need a platform that basically supports the mediation of a wide variety of protocols to bridge between the APIs and services within your environment. You also need a native understanding of these different things to eliminate custom coding. It's very, very easy, or potentially easy, to expose a REST API from a SOAP service by writing code. You could write some code that will make that or make that happen. But it's much, much easier if the platform understands both SOAP services and JSON REST services and can mediate itself without any custom code. That will allow you to get your API published out there into the world much, much quicker than writing custom code and deploying that through your SDLC. So the other thing that APIs often require is multiple calls to different back-end systems. You might need a single call coming in that needs to be simpler than your standard sort of back-end calls and interactions. So you might want to take something that's quite complex and expose it in a simple way to a particular kind of channel. So if you think about maybe you're doing peer-to-peer payments, but your existing payment system is complex with very complex XML documents over JMS message queues internally, and you just want to expose a very simple REST API to transfer money from one bank account to another. That coordination of those multiple back-end calls and the transformation of those back-end message representations to some simple API representation needs to be able to, or needs to be done within the API platform. This also speeds up the API development to meet the needs of the business quickly, and it also, if you do it right, abstracts the protocol and security from the API developer, so they can build these mediations, these orchestrations, for want of a better term, and they can layer non-functional requirements such as protocol and security on top of that. So they can change it from JMS to HTTP, or they can layer OAuth on, or they can put an HMAC header in. All of these things can be added on top of any kind of orchestration or integration work that you've done. So this comes back to using a particular gateway. So when you look at the products that are available in the market today, there's a group of products called API gateways that essentially broker the communication between these clients, the APIs, and the services on the backend system. They support multiple protocol bindings and can provide that protocol mediation. They support enforcement and implementation of a variety of security protocols and integration with multiple identity systems across multiple trust domains. A gateway can also typically do data conversions from, say, JSON to XML, with simple orchestrations and transformations involved as well. And last but not least, aggregating multiple calls across a complex orchestration to perhaps expose a simpler API. So this is the world of a gateway, and what typically encompasses a standard set of requirements for a gateway. So let's look at monitoring and remediation as well. Performance and failures are often driven by downstream APIs and services. So whatever you put in place for your API platform needs to support or provide you with root cause analysis, it needs to provide you with capacity planning, and it needs to provide you with throttling and quality of service management across multiple API calls, both front-end and back-end. If you think about root cause analysis, you need to figure out what back-end systems are failing that is causing your API to fail. If you think about capacity planning, you need to look at the capacity that's being driven by your API and how that affects all of your different back-end systems. If you're looking at throttling and quality of service management, you need to make sure that your SLAs that you're putting into place, the actual commitments that you've made as an organization, can be supported by the back-end systems that you have in play. So if you're looking at an API platform that is providing this monitoring and remediation, you need to be able to determine what your dependencies are from your top to the bottom. You need to be able to find the root cause of any kind of failures that exist, and you need a consistency of metrics for all the APIs. So you need to understand that potentially your rewards API is calling a partner API, which calls the accounts and fulfillment API, which ultimately calls inventory. And somewhere in that chain of dependencies, you have something that's performing poorly, something that's not meeting your SLAs, something that's not providing the throughput that you need, or its latency is very high. So you need to be able to understand from your API management platform what the root cause of a particular problem is. So last but not least, you also need to look at lifecycle management. At their core, APIs and services are both just software. So to be able to build APIs and services, or just APIs depending on your terminology, you need to be able to provide templates and standards and best practices and control. And the goal of these things is to accelerate development. You really need to be able to respond adequately and quickly to the needs of the business, and the needs of the business is increasing in terms of pace. So what we're seeing with the advent of cloud and mobile technologies is the pace of development and the pace of innovation is increasing. So it's becoming more and more important to increase the pace of API development to meet the needs of the business. And the way to do that appropriately and effectively within an organization is to provide easy to understand templates and standards, best practices, and to provide control to make sure that people are doing the right thing at the right time. And this all falls into the overall concept of lifecycle management and how you actually manage the design, development, and operations of the APIs within your platform. So, in conclusion, I truly believe that APIs are a superset of services. The differentiation being that APIs have a business or product focus. Secondarily, API standards are constantly evolving. So you need to be careful when you invest in an API platform. You need to make sure that the technology is not constrained by the architecture or by the hardware, that it's not focused on XML, it's not focused on REST, or only does SOAP services. So you really need to make sure that the technology that you're looking at acquiring is flexible enough and modern enough and customizable to handle those things that not even that company could think of. Irrespective of the standards, I also believe that APIs need a single platform for publication, integration and mediation, monitoring and remediation, and lifecycle management. Thank you very much. My name is Alistair Farquharson. I'm the CTO of SOA Software, and you can reach me at the following contact information.